Hello again, and it's early February here in Ontario, and the RV's covered under about 2 feet of snow, so it's kind of depressing this time of year. But anyhow, I got the idea that I would make a video of, and this I've sat down and thought about it, of 6 mistakes that I've made doing RVs, and to sort of talk about maybe how to avoid those types of things. One of the things you have to watch if you are a part-time RVer, such as we are just now, if you're in the RV, let's say in the summertime, fair bit, and you get completely used to it again, and how to do everything, and what to watch for, and how to hitch the Jeep up, and all that stuff. But then you're out of it for a number of months. Even if you take it out for a drive every 2 or 3 weeks like I do, it's not the same, and you forget things. So that's one way that some things can go wrong if you're not careful. So let's start with the number 6 here. And some of these things just boil down to having the discipline to do a check before you leave. One of my problems is I'm always in a hurry. You know, that's slowing down a bit as I get older. But an RV is a complicated machine. And in your driving area, you don't really have indicators that say such and such a door is open, or the antenna is not down, or whatever it is. And you have to check those things, or you're going to have to pay a repairman. And so I've left compartment doors open. I was actually in a campground in near Petersburg, Virginia once, and I was sitting at the laundry little building they have there where you do the laundry, and a couple were coming out with their big diesel pusher RV, and they were moving slowly, and I saw that they had their awning still out. So this 8 or 10 foot awning was sticking straight out to the side. It was only a matter of time before they hit a tree. So I just, in a non-threatening way, I just walked right out and stood in the center of the road, so they had to stop. So the gentleman opened the door, opened his window, and asked me, and I said, "I'm sorry, sir, but your awning is out." And they were relieved because that would have been a real mistake. I've been in another place where the RV was being sold, and someone put the awning out and went to put it back in. Who didn't know what they were doing, and it ripped it off the wall, off the side of the building. So you have to be careful, and you have to take your time and make sure you know what to do. One of the nice things about the world we live in today with YouTube is there's so many wonderful videos that show you different procedures and how to move forward, and from that you can then build, your own ideas. So number 6 was leaving doors open. I've had compartments on the side of the our Class A RV. They open up when you unlock them. The newer ones now open to the side, which is nicer perhaps. And you might have them closed and you just didn't pay attention that you haven't turned the latch. And so then if you drive down the road, it jiggle, and some of them might pop up again. And if that happens, cars pass you, or you're in close quarters somewhere, the door is going to strike. So, and I've had people tell me on the road, I had to pull over and fix it, and said some dark things to myself about being so foolish. Drove across the state of Florida once with the back door of one of my compartments on an older RV wide open, flapping in the wind. They didn't lose anything. They were just... Number 5. So we towed the Jeep, and I made the decision, and it actually turned out to be the right one. Instead of having the tow, the electricity for the signal lights to be run through the electrical system of the Jeep, I put magnetic lights like a tow truck does on the top of the Jeep. Now this works really well for us because we generally put the bicycles on the back of the Jeep, and I have a cover for them. So because of that, you can't see the lights, the signal lights and so forth on the Jeep on the back. But by having the magnetic lights up high like that, you can see them just fine. It works just great. So then the question is, how do you connect that the signal wire for the magnetic to your RV. So I run it along, in and out of the the doors, and just clamp it with the electric or with the foam. It seems to work pretty well. And then I go through the hood of the car, and it comes out the other end of the hood by the headlight, and then it just hangs across the gap. The problem that you face is that when you turn left, it stretches it out, and if you turn right, then it's very short, and you have a lot of wire there that can, and that happened to me one time, and I came out somewhere, and I forget exactly now, but we pulled it loose. I think it pulled out of the plug on the back of the RV when we turned left, because it was fairly sharp, and then we didn't notice it, and then I got underneath the wheel of the Jeep or whatever and ripped it off, and so the cord was torn. And of course, in these days, nobody fixes anything anymore, so we had to replace the entire light set at $50. So what I did is I went into, I think it's Princess Auto, and I got a plug. It's just an extension, and this is still a flat plug. It plugs into, or actually it's the proper round 7 conductor plug that plugs in the back of the RV to a flat plug, but it's one of those coil things, so it maintains tension, but it can stretch out. And it's also fluorescent, so it'll glow in the dark, and so you can see it in your camera, and because it's thicker too, it's more obvious. So that's been just grand, and so really enjoy using that. Number 5. No, I did number 5. Number 4. You have to be very careful if you have a motorized step. And this is, from what I understand, true for practically all RVs. The step motor is not designed to be loaded. So the step motor is only able to have enough oomph to put the step out or bring it in. If you stand on the step or there's weight on the step when this happens, it'll wreck the motor. And that happened to me. And it also broke the controller on the step, so it was about $1,000 before we were done, just because I'd stepped on the step. Another way you can get in trouble with this too, some of the new diesels have these new steps where if they encounter an obstacle, they'll stop. But most of the cheaper RVs don't have that feature. So be very careful when you park near a curb, because if you put the step out, it may hit the curb. And if it does, that's the same as being loaded. Because most of those motors are just on a geared wheel, and it does a revolution, and that's enough to force the step out, or vice versa, and there's no real logic to retract it. So just be mindful that you park a sufficient distance from any type of curb or something so that you can extend the step, and be very careful, because remember, when you open the door, the step goes out right away. You don't have time to really scope that out, so be cautious about it. And when that was repaired, they couldn't figure out how to get the step's logic to work properly for some reason. I don't know if it's a bad ground or just whatever, but the company, they spent some time on it, they couldn't figure it out. So the problem that we had was we couldn't use the switch that would keep the step deployed when we were stopped at a campground somewhere. So every time it opened the door, the step would come in and go out again. And I was concerned about the duty on the motor and the mechanism. So I got the idea to link the switch to the magnetic switch on the door. And I figured out the logic. And so the switch that we now have in the cab, near the stepway there, you can throw that and the step will stay out. And it's worked really well. It just took me half a day to run everything and figure it out. The only problem is, and we have to watch this, is that the step no longer retracts when you start the engine. That's the one thing missing from the logic that they can't fix. So what we did is the switch that leaves the step extended is a toggle switch. And so my wife painted some white nail polish on the driver's side of that. So I can turn and look back at that area. If I see the white, I know that switch needs to be thrown. Unfortunately, in most RVs, you don't have the switches at the driver's console when you're about to leave. There are some switches there, but there's not enough of them. Some of them are elsewhere in the RV and so on, and you have to get up out of your console and so forth, where you need, it would be nice just to be able to throw a switch. And so that's something that I would like to see improved upon. Anyhow, we have to augment this. My wife and I are to the left, and I show this in a different video I made. It's on my webpage. Is that I made a checklist with a label maker of things to check before I pull away, and this is one of them. We almost never use the antenna, so I don't worry about that too much. But the step is a concern. We have to make sure that's been properly retracted and so forth, so that we don't end up with this problem. Number 3 is something I absolutely hate with respect to RVing, and we do everything humanly possible to stop it, and that is getting mice in the RV. When I grew up as a boy, our farmhouse had mice in it, and I just hate them. I can't deal with them. We deal with a lot of things, but even if we catch them in a trap, if I'm not using a shovel that's 6 feet long, I can't deal with them, and I don't want to deal with them. So my wife will use the dustpan or whatever and make them go away. So how do they get in? Now, Class A type RVs, generally speaking, are better buttoned up than a trailer might be. They're just heavier built. However, things over time move a little bit. You can get them in when there's openings in the RV that you might not expect, such as, let's say your mechanic is working on the engine and the doghouse is open. If you leave the doors open, they can get in, and they'll get in there quick, and you might not even see them. And of course, if you leave your RV in a particular place for long enough, they'll find ways into other places. It's important that you keep the RV as sterile as you can. There's to be no food whatsoever kept in the RV. Any kind of nesting material like paper towels or toilet paper, whatever, has to be out of any type of closet where a mouse can never get anywhere near it. And you put traps in there. Now I'm I'm a scorched earth kind of guy when it comes to these things, so we use the old-fashioned spring traps, and we kill them. And because the problem is that, as my sister likes to say, if one comes in, he usually brings a friend, and if you have a litter, you're going to have 13 friends. Before you know it, you're going to have more troubles. And remember too that mice, when they're running around, they're not house trained, so they're peeing and pooping all over your cushions, your countertops, and all the rest of it. And it can be, I suppose, in rare cases, since not everybody gets sick, but you can have troubles. And so when we have that happen, that has happened to us, we clean the RV completely. Every surface that's accessible that has any sense of contact, we are spraying it with disinfectants and so forth. If you leave, sometimes they can get into the cupboards underneath, say the sink or something, because they come in where the lines come in. We're going to do some additional mouse proofing this summer as soon as it warms up a bit. There's a couple of places. There's a cabinet underneath the sink in the bathroom where there's some wires come in that area, so we want to use spray foam to fill that up. And there's another fairly large opening underneath the shower that we hope to be able to get in and put some spray foam in that area too, and just simply make it harder, more complicated for them. But I really hate it, and if you get them in, we've covered our vents on our furnace because they were getting in there when they would get in, and so we've covered the vents so they can't get into the furnace system from the main house that way anymore, so that seems to work pretty well. So the other thing, of course, is to keep your doors closed. We were at a park, and the people who met us were just the most nice and most gracious people. We were so glad. It was really nice. We just really thought, gee, maybe we'd come back here. And so we stood outside of our RV, and our RV was nowhere near the edge of the campground. It was pretty much in the middle of it. Now, there was a lawn, but it was all shortcut. And so it was about 10 o'clock at night, I guess. And so we were just talking, visiting with one of the owners that welcomed us. And we had left the screen door open. And maybe that was 10 or 15 minutes, and that was it. And we ended up with at least one mouse in the RV then, and Nadine took over, my wife took over, and started to try and find a way to get one. So she left the door open with the idea of herding the mouse out the door. And I went for a walk because I was just frustrated with it all, which is not my manly response, but that's what happened. And then I came back, and she had set up barricades and this and that and the other, and finally we were able to take a broom and sweep the mouse outside, and we closed the door. We thought, okay, we're finished. So I wake up in the morning, and I had a half decent sleep, and I thought I was fine. And so she then recounts that in the middle of the night she heard noises, and there were 2 or 3 more that had come in at the same time. So and they got into our food and so on, so we had to go home instead of go on to another event. So that was pretty disappointing, and all for 10 or 15 minutes. So you have to be pretty careful. So plug the holes as best you possibly can. Make sure you have traps in the RV. Always, if they do get in when you're in it, at least you can sanitize the bedroom area, barricade the door, put enough traps out there that by morning you'll have, hopefully your problems will be solved. So when we store it, we have 8 or 9, 10 traps. They're all over the place. And we usually use fairly fresh ones, because if you get goo on the trap, sometimes they won't trip, and the mouse can come along and take whatever off of it and move on. So you have to watch. But that can take a lot of fun out of RVing if you get them in there. And I think another thing about driving it every 2 weeks or whatever, you're in and out of the RV, if any animal happens to be underneath somewhere thinking about it, you scare them away. And that's just fine with me. So, number 2. So when I attach my Jeep Liberty to the back of the RV, I'm very careful, because we want to make sure we tow it with the transmission properly set up. You have to go through a procedure. So it's using the interlock neutral, not the transmission neutral. You actually tow it in park, which is kind of scary when you think about it. And your ignition is unlocked and so forth, and you have to do all this. And so I have a procedure that I follow and try to be very honest about it so we don't have a mistake. So, but here's what happens. So one day I go in, and I was by myself. So the seconds, you have to leave the keys in the ignition, because it has to keep it unlocked, and it has to power the brake controller. So I had to go into Walmart after I'd hooked everything up to get something. And so I had to take the keys out, I locked the Jeep, lock the RV, go in, buy whatever I needed, come back out, put the keys open the Jeep. No, I don't think I opened the Jeep. That's right, too. Hop in the RV, give it no second thought, because once again, I'd gone through the checklist, and I was past that. I'm pulling onto the road out for the RV, and I find my RV is pulling in one direction or another that it never has before. Now, right away, I should stop, but no, it's just something that'll go away. So, 20 kilometers later, I had a motorist coming past me who caught my attention and warned me over, because he could see that the Jeep tires weren't tracking properly, that the wheels were turning, but they were turned on an angle. So I get out and I realize that I had been towing it with the steering column locked, and the Jeep wheels were not tracking properly. It's a pretty serious mistake. I'm damned lucky that nothing came of it. The tires were fairly new, and as far as I can tell, and I've driven the Jeep a fair bit since, there was no damage. I'm just lucky that it was a fairly robust vehicle that could put up with that kind of abuse, because it was a pretty stupid mistake. So we were very careful about going back before we drive the RV, no matter what we've done before, going back over, making sure that everything is as advertised. You're doing this for fun. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't be in your work-a-day, oh boy, I've got to go as fast as I can kind of mode. I'm 5 minutes late all the time. You have to slow it down and make sure. And I was fortunate on that particular mistake that I didn't end up with more damage. So my number one mistake was kind of sad in a way, because I was on a trip. We were coming back up through West Virginia, and I had to stop at a campground that was right beside the highway, which was fine. And so the pull-throughs were slightly canted on the right, to the right, so that, like, in other words, the right side of the RV would be kind of low. So you kind of had to jack the RV to get it more so. And I had just, before we began away, I watched the video from the company that made the jacks for my RV. In this RV, the two back ones are independent and the front ones come down together. So they said drop the front ones first and then use the back ones to level your RV. And I did exactly that. But in this particular case, because the ground was so canted, I had to use fairly substantial input on the right rear jack. Never thought anything of it. Did what I was supposed to do. But of course, because the two front ones had come down and were both on the ground, and now I'm pushing with the right one, I'm effectively twisting the RV. I'm creating torsion. Well, I didn't think of that. And so my sister and I are in there working away. About a half an hour later, you hear no idea. We'd had the drapes closed and stuff. I never thought of it. And I come, and then I had to get something from the driver area, and I moved the curtain, and I could see that the windshield on the left side, and these are these huge, two-piece in this example, is all crazed. And I'm thinking, how can this be? And so we made some, so I see what's going on, and I talked to some people. They explained with safety glass, there's a piece of plastic in between both layers of glass, and that the glass, it shouldn't implode, but they said to keep the shards coming off, just to cover it with duct tape, which is what we did. And so that worked. The solution worked, but it was, and so then when I got it to the RV repair, when I got back home again, he said to me that because it's under torsion, he says, when I release the glass, he says, it's going to break the other windshield. And he was right. So that was $3,470. Now, thankfully, the insurance company was willing to pay for my stupidity. But as much as there was that instruction video, you have to think sometimes. And especially when you're putting dramatic inputs in of what you're really trying to do. It never occurred to me. I actually have one of the storage compartments that's slightly buckled as well because of the forces involved. These jacks are powerful. The ones on the back are 11,000 pounds. I mean, they can do a lot. So what we do now with the jacks, and there was a couple of other people have told me some things, and I don't know, maybe with a gas unit it's as tightly built as a diesel. But the idea is that you put your jacks down after you put your slide out. So the slide goes out without the vehicle being twisted a little bit or whatever happens when you use your jacks. So that way the slide should run out nice and clean and not bind. When the slide is out, then you can use your jacks to level the vehicle appropriately. The other thing that was suggested too is when you run your slides out, open a window or open the door and have the screen door there. You are moving out a fair substantial volume, and the air has to come from somewhere. Now, maybe in an older RV, the gaps around the seals will be adequate, but I've seen the curtains, flutter when the air is coming in the RV for that. So that's something to think about when you're doing that. Those are 5, 6 things that I did that created some trouble. I would imagine if the last one is, you have to make sure, and we've been lucky with this, but it could catch up to you, is make sure before you drive away that you've gone through the RV and that nothing can fall and get smashed or break something in the RV. And there's some things to think about with this. If you've been camped for a while, you might have things, decorative things on the shelves. You might have certain dishes up and around. Things set up that, you have them, if you're just staying for a couple of days, you may not deploy. One of the things that we have to watch with our RV is the shower head. The holder is getting tired, and so we have to make sure that the shower head's on the floor of the shower, because it'll fall when you're moving away, and that will either break the shower head or, far worse, perhaps crack the floor of the shower, which would be a disaster. So we found that out the hard way. We had the coffee maker fall out one time and break. So there's things that can happen. Even though the thing too, those folding crates, you have them on the countertop and you're not paying attention, and you drive away, they'll slide off and hit the floor, and the crate will be finished, and then you'll have your bits and pieces everywhere. So don't have things in the upper cabinets that are really heavy, that could actually push past the door strut. Now I have glasses up there and plates and stuff, and they've never had any problem. And I guess that also extends to the idea that I've had before about driving the RV gently, to protect the stuff inside, to be nice to the suspension and the engine and the transmission of the RV, all those types of things to prolong it. But this will also help you as well. So anyhow, those are some things that happened to me. Take your time, make checklists, and think what you're doing. Think about what you're doing, and don't ever get in a hurry. Okay? Enjoy what's left of the winter. RV season is coming.